Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to episode 111 of The Reformed Gamers, the show all about theology, video games, being scared out of our mind, yet pushing forward through the mist. I am your slightly under the weather host, Logan. And joining me today, almost forgot because I was just going to be like, whatever, it's just the usual rigmarole. They just introduce yourselves. Joining us for this episode is host of the So Talk to Me podcast, Josh Broccolo. What's up, man?
Hello there. I'm doing good. I'm glad that was a different introduction than I expected. I was gonna say I'm your sunbro guest, Josh.
Oh, right, sunbro. Because we're talking about Dark Souls.
I love being a sunbro.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Fair
I dig
enough.
it. Anyways.
We're already like a couple minutes into the podcast and I'm tripping over my words. So we know this is going to be a great episode.
But don't worry, I did it before you, so it's
there we
okay.
Go. So we can trip over our words together and then get up and put our hands in the air and praise the sun, right? That's how it goes. Dear listeners, in case you haven't noticed, we're going to be talking about Dark Souls this episode. So this one's going to be a little bit different than our normal in-depth game episodes because those ones you have to worry about spoilers and all that jazz. But in this one, because we have no idea what the story even is in Dark Souls, there's nothing to spoil, so you can listen to the whole thing. I'm kind of kidding about that, but I'm also semi-serious. And I lost what I was going to say. So there's that.
There are bits and pieces. It's definitely a difficult story to unravel, but there are some things.
Maybe you can educate me a little bit because I'm trying to figure it out. And the only thing I got so far is like, if I die, my character turns green, and that's all I know. So that's it.
Yep. You go hollow, man.
Yep.
Once you go hollow, you can come back with items. Anyway.
Once you go hollow, you can't come back. Man, I wish, there was a time in our in TRG history where we would take a funny quote from the episode and have that be the name of the episode. And if we still did that, that's what the name of this episode would be. Once you go hollow, well, you can come back or something like that.
Nice.
So anyway, dear listeners, real quick before we get into all the fun and games of this episode, Josh, why don't you tell the listeners about you and your wife's podcast, So Talk to Me, a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think I've had a different podcast going on every time you've had me on this this podcast, which is awesome. Consistency, right?
Right.
But actually, no, this is the longest I've ever held down a podcast. So I think we're 22 episodes in, so it's not aged or anything. It's still fairly new, but we're keeping at it. Anyways, yes. So Talk to Me is just a podcast I do with my wife where we sit down and have intentional conversations with each other. We tended to do that beforehand, and sometimes like after we talk, we're just like, man, that was a good conversation. Like I wanted to replay it through in my mind. And I'm an audio guy. I do tech for a church. That's my day job. And so we have microphones. We've got Pro Tools recording stuff at home. And so we were like, hey, why not just go ahead and record some of these conversations? And it's been great for us because it's brought us together and had us just intentionally set aside that time every week to talk about something. It has morphed a little bit into kind of a sort of like layman theology podcast. Yeah. Like a lot of the times the stuff we like to talk about are just some like theological concept that we have been thinking about recently. That was not my initial intention. I just wanted to talk about just whatever because we talk about whatever, but it's kind of turned into more theology. So like, I don't know, maybe the name isn't very descriptive. Maybe we should have come up with something else that's more theologically inclined. But no, we went with So Talk to Me.
Yeah.
So that we could just talk to each other and hopefully encourage other people, especially like husbands and wives, to be more intentional about communication, because we've had friends who have struggled in that area. So we wanted to kind of set some sort of a model. I mean, not that we're great at it, just that like it's doable, in this day and age. You have busy lives, but it's important to stay connected, especially to your spouse, but in general to other people. If I don't mean to get on a soapbox here, I like playing single player games. I don't do much online gaming. I do a little bit, not that much. And so sometimes video games becomes a thing where it's like pretty selfish and like all about me. Yeah. And that's not right, especially for a Christian to be all just consumed with yourself. So like, even if you're not married, you should still be in community with other people. You should still have deep conversations. And so learn how to do that is my encouragement. Anyways, that's my 10 minutes on what my podcast is about. Sorry.
No, man, it's good. And the funny thing is, I'm pretty sure I've Reco'd y'all's podcast before. And if not, then I'm going to do it right now real quick because, and I was telling you this before the show, the dear patrons have already heard me talk about this a little bit, is that I listened to y'all's show. Me and my wife actually listened to it together. And we really enjoy it because you guys do a really good job of talking about topics regarding theology, but you guys don't do it to where you go super in depth, where you start pulling out these $20 seminary words and it's just really confusing. But you guys make it fun to listen to. Like it's actually enjoyable to listen to. It's not dry or monotonous. It's actually fun to listen to. And plus the banter between you and your wife is just absolutely hilarious. I talked a little bit about that pre-show and it's good stuff. So, dear listeners, if you haven't checked out their show, definitely go do that now. Whatever, you can pause this as a show, then go listen to that. Do what you want, but go check out So Talk to Me. Fantastic stuff. Real quick, to take care of a few housekeeping things before we go any further. Just to remind y'all, we are on Patreon. So if you like what we do here at The Reformed Gamers, you can go to patreon.com/TheReformedGamers to lend your support, get early access to all of our episodes, get access to the patron only feed. And because we've surpassed this specific goal on Patreon, we're going to do a game giveaway every single month. And just to get it out of the way, we're actually going to give away a copy of Celeste this month to one of our patrons. Yeah, fantastic game. You guys will hear us gush about it probably this episode. I know Adam picked it up and he's been playing it. So you guys will hear us gush about that. Went ahead and did the drawing before we started recording, and we are giving a copy of Celeste away to the dear patron, Jeff Wofford. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Just check your Patreon messages. We'll be messaging you to see what platform you want that on. I'm pretty sure you play on Xbox, but if you want it for PC, we'll try and get you a code. Also, with our Patreon, we do have a $25 tier that is... excuse me. That is being supported by two dear patrons, Alex Castellanos, and again, I'm sorry if I butcher these last names, and Richard Marroquin. They are our producers of this episode. They are donating at the highest tier for TRG Patreon. So guys, thank you for being producers of the show. And I heard that these guys are so rad that they once stopped a robbery at a McDonald's, and then somehow, while they were waiting for the police to come by, they shared the gospel with this robber, and the dude accepted Christ. I don't know if that's a real story. I'm just making it up as I go.
What?
But, it's a cool thing. These guys are cool, so I'm trying to think of a cool story, and I've got nothing. So Alex and Richard, if you guys have cool stories about yourselves, let me know, and I'll talk about it on the podcast. But again, thank you for being the producers of this episode. Awesome stuff. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, man.
You know what's funny is I actually... I have a funny seminary story that I'll tell real quick. There was this guy who was working in our security department at our seminary, and he actually caught some guy that was trying to break in and steal someone's car or something. And while he's standing there with the guy, waiting for the police to show up to take him away, this guy's he's tall and he has a very deep voice, and he's just kind of intimidating. And I can't remember what exactly the guy said, but he said something about like letting him go or something like that, or like if he was going to beat him up or something. And the guy just the security officer looks at him and goes, "No, but I will sit here and talk to you about Jesus until the police come by." And so I don't know if that guy accepted Christ or not, but it's just a funny story that like our security guard caught a guy trying to steal a car, and then he just shared the gospel with him. So I'm sure the guy trying to steal the car felt completely awkward the entire time, but who knows, maybe hopefully he repented and followed Christ. So anyway.
Yeah, man.
Funny.
That's awesome.
Funny
That's awesome. Taking like what you have and pointing towards Christ. That's so cool.
It was.
Like, I'd imagine that would be a very good opportunity just to be like, look, you and I both know you need to repent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you going to, you're guilty.
Yep.
You're guilty. What are you going to do about that guilt?
Yep.
That's awesome.
It's cool stuff, man. Cool stuff. I know people give Southwestern a lot of crap, but for the most part, pretty solid school. So I will say that, not go any further. Let's go ahead and get into the show. So welcome to the Reform Gamers, as we like to start a show like we always do with a little bit of what we've been playing, what we've been reading, and eventually I will speak that slogan so fast it will be totally, you won't be able to understand what I'm saying. So fantastic stuff. Anyway, Josh, because you are the guest of honor, the guest of the show this episode,
Aww.
Man, tell the dear listeners, what have you been playing?
All right. Well, I have really been focusing on one game in particular, and so it's really funny that you had me on this episode. I've been playing Dark Souls 2 right? Scholar. Yeah, Barbie's. No, it's Funky Barn for
gotcha.
Wii U.
Oh, the new one. Okay.
It's just so good. You make the barn and then you make it funky.
Sounds good.
White boy. Anyways, no. So Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin edition. I actually just technically beat the game on.
Nice.
It was a Valentine's Day. Yeah, after went out with my wife. She went to bed and I stayed up late into. Oh no, actually, technically, it would have been the day after Valentine's Day is when I technically beat the game. But there's still plenty of stuff to do, but I'm taking a break because I hit that mark. Anyways, we can talk about that game more later. But the game I was playing before that was on 3DS, technically on Game Boy Color. I was playing it in the Virtual Console. It was Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages.
Nice.
Link's Awakening is like one of my favorite Zeldas of all time. It was the first Zelda game I ever played. Zelda does not even make an appearance in it. It is super weird and cartoony, and I love it to death. And this one, technically it was made by Capcom, but they use like the same engine as that game, some of the same music, some of the same assets. And so it has a very similar feeling to Link's Awakening, and I'm loving it. Unfortunately, Dark Souls stole my life, and I haven't played it in quite a while, but I am enjoying it a lot.
Fantastic.
So if you can't tell, I'm for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a bit of a retro gamer at the moment. So I play old games, but
man, there ain't nothing
we
wrong
did
with that.
I love it. I own a lot of old games that I need to beat down from my backlog that I haven't. So it's a good opportunity now that I'm not tempted to buy every new game that comes out.
Yeah. That's been a struggle for me this past years, like not buying new games because I'm like, no, I need to be serious about this backlog. My wife's like looking at me like, you ain't buying any more games, but it still happens from time to time.
Yeah, so. I think the latest game that I played through was like the newest one was Breath of the Wild, and that's another game that just like stole my life. I say that, I mean, I did it. I intentionally. It didn't really steal anything, and I'm never giving it back.
Nope.
Yeah. So yeah, that's like the new. So it was actually. I was talking with my brother a couple weeks ago, and I was like, it actually is kind of freeing not to like be super focused on the next new game. And I still listen to video game podcast. Like I'm still up on what's coming out and stuff like that. Like some games just look awesome. Mario Odyssey looks amazing. I haven't played it because I don't own a Switch. But it is really cool actually not to be tempted to spend the money on a game when I have a bunch of old ones that I can play through and have an amazing time.
Yeah. You're not really missing out on anything. There hasn't been a good game to be released since 2001, I think. No good game since then. So you're not missing out on anything.
I mean, I liked Breath of the Wild.
Totally.
But I heard everything else that came out last year, like Battlefront 2, like I heard it was all trash.
Oof.
So,
yeah.
You know, Persona 5, garbage.
True.
Horizon Zero, yawns.
Yeah, the worst. Yeah.
Just terrible. Resident Evil, what are they on, like 96 at this point?
Too many. They need to just
spin-offs.
Stop. They need to just stop.
Yeah, exactly. So forget that. I'm playing my old stuff.
There you go. I'm going to laugh for like the person who's like never listened to this show before they get on here and they hear us just trash all these like really
awesome games.
They're like, what? Who? What? I'm not going to listen to these guys anymore. I'm going to go listen to, I don't know who it is, Retro Nuts or something. I don't know.
Yeah, don't worry. I won't be on the next episode. So if you're mad at me, just skip over for being a dork.
Nah, I'll agree with you. Horizon Zero Dawn, totally boring. Worst game ever.
Terrible. So bad.
It's one of those
garbage.
Cuphead is garbage because it's just too hard. But
so Dark Souls.
Dark Souls. No. Lost my train of thought. It's one of those nights, dude.
It's all good. It's all good. I can roll in here. So that was games stuff. And sorry, I take tangents all the time. So what have I been reading? Yeah. I've been reading a bunch of books lately. You can follow me on Goodreads. I try and do like at least a little tiny review of everything I try to read just for my own sake of like reflecting on what I've read and trying to be concise in what I've learned from it. Anyways, so I've been reading a lot more over the past year since I started going back to school. Right now, I'm reading a book called "You Are What You Love: The Spiritual Power of Habit" by James K.A. Smith. I have it right in front of me. That's the only reason I know. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm only a couple chapters in. I like it. I'm just not sure that I'm fully on board yet. But I'm still just starting out, so it could definitely sway me more. But it's basically about how so it's called "You Are What You Love," right? So basically, like, we all have an end goal in our life. Like, we're all working towards something, and when we realize what we're working towards, we can see like how we are. Oh gosh, I feel like I'm messing this up. But basically, our actions are the fruit of the things that we love and the end goal of our life. So like, even if we feel like we don't have an end goal or an ultimate purpose, like it's misleading, because the things that you do throughout your days actually show what it is that you're working towards. If that makes any sense at all. Yeah. So like, even if you're not, even if you don't have any aspirations in life, your end goal is like, maybe it's just pleasure, it's just so that you can be happy today, so that you can, like video games, the end goal in you're playing video games all day is like to make yourself happy. And so you are what you love. It's kind of talking about what are the gods that you're serving, and sort of that idea. It goes into a couple things. It talks about habits so far and how habits create like the mindset of what you're working towards, because it's what you're spending your time on. So yeah, it's interesting. Again, I feel like it's kind of a paradigm that I'm not fully convinced of yet, but I do enjoy what I've read so far.
Fantastic.
Hopefully that made a little bit of sense.
Yeah. I'm actually looking it up on Goodreads right now, and the cover of it looks really familiar. I'm wondering if I have a copy of that or not. So.
Oh, sweet.
I might. I don't know. I'll check. It's the thing about seminary. You buy a ton of books and then you just forget what ones you got. So anyway.
You read like 3 chapters for the class. And then
exactly.
You're like, oh, that was good. I'll get back to it after I read the other 6 books for this class.
6, that's more like 20.
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, that's good stuff though. So as far as what I've been playing, words are hard.
Both.
So I talked a little bit about Monster Hunter World last episode. I actually put that game on the back burner because I broke the 55-hour mark and was like, yeah, I'm
Wow.
burnt out. Like,
wow, that's awesome.
I don't know if it's awesome. It feels like I just wasted a bunch of time for the most part.
Yeesh.
It's just, it's gotten to a point where, like, you know how when you play a game so much and you put all of this time into it, it just starts feeling like a chore at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's how it started feeling. But
How much of those 55 hours was solo and how much was in a group?
putting me on the spot, I'd say 8 to 10 hours is probably solo. And then the rest of it is multiplayer, because
most of it. Sweet.
Yeah, because after you get past a certain point, I think it's when you get into the high rank missions, you need other people to play with you. Like, you could probably solo it if you get used to your play style, but I mean, I've just called in because you can light a flare up and that'll bring other people in, just random people that are usually better than you. And so that's been helpful. But at the same time, it's just, and we talked a little bit about this pre-show, is that, you know, I'm just at a point where, like, weeks like this past week, you know, I haven't had any time, and it's been the reason why we're getting this episode out so late, and it's why the YouTube content's been so late. It's just been a crazy week where I've had very little free time. And so in the free time that I do have, I don't want to grind stuff out to try and get a new shiny piece of gear. So it takes me back to my horror days of Destiny, and I don't want to go back there. So I put that on the back burner so I could play other games, and I went back to playing Fury. It's just, I mean, have you played Fury? Have you played that at all, or?
I haven't. No, okay. I've heard it's lots of boss battles. Yes. I've heard it's difficult, but it's good. So like, I'm like sitting here playing Dark Souls, and I'm like, oh, so it's like this?
Pretty much. It's like,
nice.
Fury's a lot like Dark Souls, but take out those sections in between boss battles and replace it with you just walking an obnoxiously long words I can't think of. There's a lot of walking in between.
Gotcha.
And so when you finally get to the boss battle, it's like, oh yeah, this is awesome. And then you walk for another like 5 minutes, and then you're just So
it's the Final Fantasy 13 of Dark Souls.
Yes, it's the Final Fantasy 13 of Dark Souls. That's exactly it. But it's more enjoyable than Final Fantasy 13 to a degree. But it's just a cool game, man. I've said this several times. Like, I hated the game when I first played it, but now I dig it. It's kind of like a lot of people have a game that they go to as kind of like a comfort food kind of game, and that's my comfort food kind of game, which sounds crazy because it's really hard, but I'm loving it.
It hurts so good.
Yes, it hurts so good. Like ripping a Band-Aid. Well, ripping a Band-Aid off isn't very fun, but you guys can fill in the blank with your own illustration. So been playing that. We're still doing a series on that on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/thereformgamers. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But I've also been playing through Celeste, and I finished it earlier today. And dude, I'm gonna say that this is probably my favorite game of the year thus far. It's that good.
Wow. Wow, good. Better than the 55 hours you did for Monster Hunter.
Yeah, I was actually telling some people this in a group chat that the 6+ hours it took me to beat that game was more enjoyable than 55 hours of Monster Hunter, which I know some of our listeners are going to be like, that makes no sense. And to which I would respond with, I have a permit that says I do what I want, so I'm gonna do what I want and say that Celeste is fantastic. And of course, playing Dark Souls 2, which we'll get to here in a little bit. Pick that back up after I finish Celeste, because I kind of put that on the back burner for a little bit to play Monster Hunter.
Okay,
but yeah, we'll talk plenty of Dark Souls talk here soon enough. Once we get past what I've been reading, which was actually, I finished a book by Charles Spurgeon called The Power of Prayer. I don't know if you've read
nice,
it or not, but it's really, really good. And there was this there's several different quotes in the book that stood out to me, and of course you can check my Goodreads account. I've made a lot of those public, but there's one specific quote where he talks about King Solomon and Proverbs, and I'll just read the quote. He says, Solomon sent the sluggard to the ant and learned himself lessons from conies, greyhounds, and spiders. Let us be willing to be instructed by any of God's creatures and go to the raven's nest tonight to learn, as in a school. And he was just kind of talking about how, you know, the verse that talks about how God takes care of the birds of the air. He you know, arrays flowers in a certain way. And, you know, how much more is God going to provide for us that are made in his image? And so he's just kind of laying that out about how we can look at the creation around us and see how God provides for them, and then think about, well, how much more is he going to provide for me since I'm made in his image? And it's all designed, it's all worded in a way to push you to go to God in prayer and be thankful and be glad, but also just bring your request before him. And he makes this cool illustration of kind of like banging on God's door and demanding, not like demanding in a arrogant way, but demanding like he listen, and you bring your request before him and you kind of just leave him there and make sure that he hears you. And it's just, it's cool because I never really considered that. Like, I mean, you read it in scripture, but the way that he worded it and broke it down is like, oh yeah, I can look at how God provides for these birds and different animals and stuff. I mean, where I live, it's like farm central. So you can see how God provides for all these different animals and stuff with like grass or feed or whatever. And it's like, how much more is God going to take care of me in certain things, you know? And so it's a really good read. It's a really good read. And I know it's sounding borderline prosperity gospel stuff in some ways, but that's not how he writes it. That's not how he words it. It's a really great book on prayer that I think a lot of people, I would even say all Christians ought to read, because especially for someone like me, I wasn't really taught really well about prayer or the importance of it. Like, you know, you grow up and you hear that you're supposed to pray as a Christian, but like no one ever really broke down like what happens when you pray or what that looks like, or how to be bold in your prayer, which is what Spurgeon does in his book so very well. And it's just, I was very encouraged by it. And so it's a book that I'm sure I'll read probably every year just to get a good refresher. But man, dear listeners, if you're the person like me who was struggling with prayer, who just didn't really understand it to a degree, pick this book up. It's fantastic. Great stuff. So Josh, I didn't know if you have any thoughts or anything to add on prayer.
Well, actually, it's funny that you ask. I've been reading a daily devotional that our senior pastor is actually requesting that all of the staff go through together, and it is on prayer, and it's actually kind of like compiled by a bunch of different people. So there's like a portion of scripture, and then there's a quotation, a couple paragraphs by someone every day. And it's on a different thing. And actually, you're talking about boldness in prayer. That was one of the focal points like about a week ago that really challenged me as well. Because like, especially if you, we're the Reformed gamers, right? So especially if you are of the more Reformed persuasion of God, of predestination, there's sometimes in the back of your mind, it's just like, well, God's going to do what he's going to do, you know, whether I pray hard or not, you know, like whether I spend a lot of time in prayer, like God knows what he's doing. He's good, and he's going to give me what's good and what's best for me. And, you know, he's going to work things according to his will, which is true. But sometimes it takes out, that boldness. So it was challenging to read about how we ought to be bold, like we ought to come before the throne, again, knowing who God is, and do so in a way because we're his children. You know, he calls us his sons and his daughters. We can come with confidence, knowing that he's going to hear us, and knowing that we can like actually make strong requests of God. Yeah. Like not, like you said, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that like Jesus has made a way so that we can actually commune with God. So that it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was really challenging to me, because I tend to lean more towards the like, well, you know better than me, God, but this would be cool if you did this, you know?
Right. And that's and to speak on the boldness thing too, because I just remembered this part from the book he's talking about, is that one of the ways that we can be bold in prayer is, and I never really considered this as being bold. I just thought it was like letting scripture influence your prayer, but he talks about how when you learn scripture verses or you read the Bible, pray those things to God. And, you know, I've always heard that and I'm like, oh, that sounds nice. But he's like, no, you need to go to God and be like, look, God, your word says that if I'm lacking in wisdom to ask and you will give it. So here I am asking for wisdom in this matter. And your word says that you will give it. And so that's that. He talks about like conducting business with God. And I'm like, that's really cool. Like I never thought of it as like a business sort of way. I mean, you always hear like, you know, in this time do business with God, but not laid out in that way. And so I've tried that a couple times this past week and just in my own prayer life. And it's just been like, it just makes prayer not this like wimpy tradition kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so great stuff. Dear listeners, seriously, I need to add this as a reco right now before I forget. But yeah, Power of Prayer by Charles Spurgeon. Fantastic stuff. Great stuff. So this episode, like I said, is going to be a little different than kind of what we normally do. And one of the other ways this is going to be different is we're not actually going to take a break. We're just kind of going to go straight into the topic because we're not doing news. We're not doing new releases because of my crazy schedule. Me and Adam weren't able to get together to record an episode, and he normally handles the news and the new releases. So we'll have him catch everybody up on that next episode. So we're just going to jump straight into the topic, which is Dark Souls, not just Dark Souls 2. Well, I mean, we've played Dark Souls 2, so we'll probably talk about that a lot. But just Dark Souls in general. Like, what is this game? Why is it good? Why do we like it? Where are we at in it? What has our experience been? And a lot of different things pertaining to that. Just kind of really seeing where the conversation goes. And to start things off, Josh, me and you both have been playing Dark Souls 2, The Scholar of the First Sin. But is this your first Dark Souls game? Like, kind of where did you start out with this series?
Okay. Well, I maybe it's a little OCD of me in general, but because I do have a lot of like old games, like I mentioned, crazy. I generally try and start series like pretty much anything, but primarily video games, but even like movies or something like that. I try and start at the beginning as much as I can. But even saying that, I actually haven't played Demon Souls, so.
Oh, I was about to ask, like, so if that's the case, then did you go back and play Demon Souls, which is actually the first one in this entire series?
Right.
But it sounds like you hadn't.
No, I didn't own that one. I had first picked up the first Dark Souls for PC. So this is before like I even knew much about the series. Okay. I just heard, you know, like all over the internet, people love Dark Souls, and they often compare things to Dark Souls. You know, this game is the Dark Souls of blah 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 blah. You know, like Shovel Knight is like Dark Souls. And I love Shovel Knight, so Dark
really
Souls should be good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, no, sorry. I could easily go on a tangent there because I just finished up the Spectre Knight stuff, which was amazing. Anyways, yeah, that kind of felt sort of dark. It's the Dark Souls of the Shovel Knight, and I don't know. Anyways, yes, I played the first Dark Souls on PC, and so this is my second go around. I think I played that through last year. I think it was like around this time last year. So I actually wasn't planning on going through the second one, but I picked it up on GameStop was doing like a 4 for $20 sale, and The Scholar of the First Sin was one of the eligible games, and I'm like, $5. What are you doing to me? Come on. So yeah, I picked it up, and it was actually part of, you know, occasionally we'll do those drafts, the backlog drafts. In the backlog group, and usually it's shared in the Reformed Gamers group on Facebook. You should check it out. So and Dark Souls 2 got drafted for me, so I'm like, okay, we're gonna do this again. I love the first one. Don't get me wrong. It's just a commitment. As I'm sure we'll kind of reference that multiple times, but they are long games, and they are games that you have to be paying attention to in order to progress well. So yeah, I played the first one, and now I just finished up the second one. I have not played Demon Souls. I own Demon Souls because that was another sale that they just had. I haven't played Bloodborne, and I haven't played the third Dark Souls, although I now own that one too. Thanks, Humble Bundle.
There you go.
Your dang monthly sales. You can pick it up for $12 right now. That's what it is. You can pick it up for $12 at Humble Bundle. I had like a 10% off coupon. So I was just like, dang it.
Might as well.
Why are you doing this to me? So it's sitting there on my PC. Probably won't get played for a little bit, but yes, this is my second go around and I'm loving it.
Fantastic.
How about you? Where did you start?
For me personally, I never actually played Dark Souls or really any of the games. My first Dark Souls-esque game was actually Bloodborne when that came out on PS4. And, I'd always heard about Dark Souls. I'm like, how hard they are. And then Bloodborne came out. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'll go ahead and try this out and see what I think. And a lot of my friends at the time were just now getting into the series too, because they didn't play Dark Souls. And so they learned the hard way, as we all did, really, kind of the difficulty of those kind of games. But I loved it. I got frustrated a lot. I would want to break my controller a lot. But there was just something about the gameplay loop, man, that just, it hooked me. I'm like, I want to keep playing this game. I keep getting destroyed by this giant dude with an axe in the opening area, but I want to keep playing. I want to keep exploring. I want to keep getting my face punched in because it feels good.
Yep.
So that got me started. But I think the first Dark Souls game I actually played was Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin Edition. And I think because me and my wife picked this up because we watched the Fine Brothers have kids react to playing Dark Souls, and I was like, we need to play this game. So we picked that up, but we got 10 minutes in, and I'm like, I don't like this. I like Bloodborne better, and so I just never touched it again until this past year when I just kind of got on like this itch to play Dark Souls for some reason, and so I picked up Dark Souls 2 and just kind of did some research, looked up a couple things on YouTube, and I think 11 hours into Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. Okay. And it's good, man. It's so good. Yeah. It's just, I think like, it's funny that you bring up Shovel Knight because in a lot of ways, this game reminds me of games like that, where they're similar to Shovel Knight or the games that came before Shovel Knight, like Mega Man and all that, where it's all about learning the enemies and kind of where they are and their move sets and their exploits. And there's just a rush that you get from figuring that out. And so it's a total nostalgia trip for me in a lot of ways, because it brings me back to those games of my childhood where that's what you do. And that's part of the gameplay loop. And once you get better at that, it gets you sucked into the game, which I guess brings into this question. What exactly makes these games so good? I mean, we have people ask this question a lot in the group. They're like, I'm interested to get into Dark Souls, but why is it good? How difficult is it? So to you, what makes these games interesting? What makes you keep coming back to them?
Yeah, so there's a couple things there, definitely, because I was totally in that same boat when I had heard about it. And the first thing that you hear about it is that it's hard, right? The re-release of the first game, at least on PC, is called Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition. Like, the game mocks you. The first trophy that popped on PlayStation, at least for PlayStation 3, I don't know if it's the same for PlayStation 4, but I assume so. The first trophy that you get is when you die. The trophy is called This is Dark Souls.
This is Dark Souls. Yeah, I got that one.
The game mocks you when you die and says, like, this is normal. You are going to die.
Get used to it.
So yes, exactly. Like, this is a part of just the loop. This is part of this is integrated into the game. Like, something is very wrong if you're not dying. And it actually, sorry, words. Come on. We got this.
They're hard, man.
That it's woven into the fabric of a lot of what this game is. So, like, it touches the story. it has to do with dying and coming back and rebirth and doing things in cycles and having things happen multiple times the same way. In death, the characters around you are all mostly undead as well. So like it takes these themes and they're not just like one-off things, you know, like in say a Mario Brothers game, you have your ice world and you have your like lava world and stuff like that, where it iterates on those concepts, but you're not really going to return. You like after the ice world, you're not really going to have any more levels that have ice on them.
Right.
Dark Souls takes these themes and puts it in every kind of little aspect of the game. And so I think what really makes these games special is how deliberate and intentional their game design is. Mm-hmm. So I was talking about difficulty, right? These are difficult games in the way that say like the first 10 hours of Breath of the Wild is difficult. You're going to die. You may get frustrated, but you learn from your death. Like you learn what you did wrong and you make adjustments to that. So yes, it's difficult in a sense because you're going to lose, you're going to die, you're going to lose your souls and get frustrated because you were just trying to get back to where you were last time. It's going to happen. Yeah. But it's also it's more of a learning game. It's not one to punish you and laugh at you. So like you mentioned Mega Man. I love the original Mega Man games. They're awesome games, but some of that old school game design is not fair.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. There's some bosses that are just cheap.
Yeah, and you can't beat portions of levels unless you know what is coming up next. So like Ninja Gaiden or something like that, where like you cannot beat that game on your first try. You have to memorize the level in order to beat it. Like you need to know where the pits are. Otherwise you're going to be walking. Like the first time you play it, you're going to walk, you're going to fall through a pit and just die.
Yep.
That stuff, there are moments of that in Dark Souls games, but really by and large, it's about training you how to play the game better. And so while it is difficult, it's not unfair. Most of the time, 99% of the time when you die in Dark Souls, it's your own fault for not countering the right way. You know, not whether that's using the proper equipment or whether that's you rolled at the wrong time and so you took an axe to the face. But it's by and large, it's your own fault. And so what that does is that when you actually overcome these obstacles that are in front of you, it feels so good because it wasn't a lucky chance of the game. It was you got better. You beat that boss on your own dime. And so I think that sense of satisfaction from conquering what previously looked insurmountable is another one of the big parts about these games in general. Yeah.
And that's the thing that I like about the game is that it gives you a sense of pride and accomplishment in a way that a loot box never could. Little subtle jab at EA there. Is that's one of the things that I liked about, and this is one of the things I caught on to when I played Bloodborne, is that, you know, often when we play a game, we're afraid to make mistakes. Like we want to be perfect. We want to be great our first run through. And it's kind of like when you first die in the game and it gives you that trophy that says this is Dark Souls. It's like, you better get used to this. But it's designed in a way to get you to not be afraid of failing because it's going to happen a lot. I mean, that's kind of what these games are notoriously known for, is just dying all the time. I think like I think they made a board game recently where like when you you open the box, there's a little insert sleeve that says you are dead or something, like right out of the gate. And I think that's what makes the game so great in that regard, is that it gets you to stop being afraid of failing. It gets you to embrace failure, to take chances, and to see that in that process of you making mistakes you learn. You learn different ways of how enemies react, how they where they can and can't go, what their shortcomings are, and some neat little things like that. It's one of the reasons why I actually like Celeste so much, to talk about this a little bit.
Nice.
Is that when you have the load screens, it gives you like little tips and stuff like all games normally do. But there's one tip card that comes up and says, don't be afraid of your death count. Rather see it as every time you die, you're learning. So keep going. And Dark Souls is the same way, although it kind of pokes fun at you a little bit when you die. It's like, you're dead, you know?
Yep. It just fades onto the screen.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, way to go. But there's just, that's part of the gameplay loop is, you know, you might blame the controls, but really you can look at that situation that you just died in and go, okay, here's what I did wrong. Here's what I can try differently next time. And it's just, I don't know, there's a little bit of that experimentation that for me is, I know addictive is kind of a bad word, but it is kind of addictive because it's like, okay, let me try something else differently this time then. So you go back up there, you know, you get your souls back, which for people listening to this and have no idea what we're talking about, souls are basically the currency in the game, which we can kind of get into a little bit of biblical discussion on that later. But so you pick those back up and then you get back into the fight and you're like, okay, what can I do differently this time? And it's just, it's really thrilling. It can be frustrating, I'm sure. I mean, Josh, I don't know how many controllers you've broken since playing the game, but I know for me personally, I've been tempted to break the controller, but I've gotten better in my old age about just putting the controller down, just walking away, and doing all that.
Muttering under your breath.
Muttering under my breath, you know. No, it really does happen. I'm just like, oh, that stupid, like, big ogre, rhino, cyclops thing that just, yeah. Anyway. So let's try to break this down as best we can, because I know this game is kind of hard to do that with because it's intentionally vague with its storytelling and all that jazz. But what is Dark Souls even about? Because I know when I looked this stuff up, there was stuff about dragons, humans coming from the first embers or fire or something like that. I mean, do you understand the story at all, or do you have any kind of inkling as to what's going on? Because that's as far as I've gotten.
So I have an idea of the stories that they're trying to tell, and it's almost purely from watching YouTube videos of people who have like done the homework in order to figure out what exactly is going on. But before going into the story itself, if I could just backtrack and kind of segue a little bit, is that I talked about the game design of this game and how everything feels so intricate. The story in this game, the way that they tell you the story is not like a typical video game where it tells you who you are and what your quest is and what you're seeking to do. With both of the two games that I've played, you have almost no idea who you are, what you're there for, and other people tell you, either they tell you what they are doing in this world, or they are attempting to convince you to do something for them. So the game in most aspects doesn't feel like it's about you at all. Yeah. Even though you're the main character, which is it's different than most video games, right? Most video games are like empowering. I mean, I love The Legend of Zelda, but in all those games, it's your typical like what's it called? Like hero arc, right? I mean, you're the chosen one, and you need to save the princess by getting all these items, right? In this game, the story is completely different. The story is told not through narration or things like that. The story is told through getting ideas from other characters in the game, but mostly through the items themselves. And whenever you die, which happens a lot, you get, at least in Dark Souls 2, I don't quite remember if it was in Dark Souls, the first one, or not, but it scrolls through different item descriptions of mostly of items that you have, but sometimes some special items as well. And it tells you the story of that item. And so the way that you you learn the story of this game is that you piece together the characters' stories along with these item descriptions, along with the environments that you're in. And this is something that I did not really notice until I started watching. There's one YouTube guy in particular. He's in the Reco section because he just breaks everything down. The channel is called VaatiVidya.
Ah, yeah. I'm subscribed to him.
VAATI. Yeah, so good. Because he does his homework. He does things like spend so much time poring over these descriptions to figure out what these stories are.
And he has a really great voice,
the environments, he does, man. Maybe I should just talk with a British accent the rest of this podcast.
Try it out.
So the story, it doesn't feel like it's about you. It's really just about the world that you're a part of. And the way that they tell you where is the environments themselves. So there's statues that you see that point towards other characters and the different sets of armor who are different characters. No, I'm done. And that's actually not the type of British accent he does. Anyways,
all of our European listeners are just silly Americans.
Cringing silly I cannot believe this dumb Texan y'all just tried to copy our accent. I'm sorry, forgive me.
Oh, hey, just
my horse right away. Anyways, so yeah, there are environmental clues. Most of the world is broken down. So you get the idea that these were once great cities, right? Mm-hmm. But something terrible has happened. So you're fighting in these ruins. The enemies themselves, a lot of them are humanoid. And so you get the idea that, something terrible happened to these people to become a certain way. Or there were experiments that were happening in this one area. And so you have centaurs or you have trees that are fighting against you. So something, you get the idea that something happened in this place. So it all, like I said, is interwoven to tell you this story that's feels more like an atmosphere when you're playing, unless you very meticulously take all these things into account. Again, I'm happy because someone else has done that for me.
Right.
And I just get to sit by the fire as he tells me the stories.
Sit by the bonfire, would you say? There we go.
Gain my life. And no, I don't know what I'm saying. I crashed and burned. You did great, but I failed.
It's okay. Hey, it's just like Dark Souls. You were dead, right? So there we go. It's got to get back up and go at it again.
There you go. Coming back here. So, story. What is the story of Dark Souls? Because of the way that it tells this story, it's a number of different stories that kind of sit side by side. So, the first Dark Souls tells the story, and it does actually open with a narration, which is the most story I've gotten out of 2 games. In how the world is created. So it is a very grim world. But there's darkness, and then all of a sudden there's a fire, and humans come from that fire, and then people start using that fire as power to fight these dragons that existed. So it's weird because it's wait, I thought you said there was nothing, but now there's something. Right. It doesn't quite all make sense, but gosh, what is the story about? It does this setup kind of hundreds of years in the past, and then your character in both of these games makes choices to either continue the world the way that it is in its kind of decrepit state, or attempt to bring it back to its former glory. However, you get the hint of the whole cyclical nature of things and how things will continue to decay. The first game also had some themes of humanity being dark, and being humans are evil beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so like being a human who's cursed to continue living, it's kind of a curse on all of existence, because that means that you are eventually going to rise to power, even though in your heart you're evil. So there's some cool, like themes there as well. You can kind of dig into.
I was thinking of Romans 3, just thinking about how like if humans are cursed to be bad, it's like, oh, it's kind of like Romans 3, how no one is righteous and all that jazz. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so like the whole game, you feel like you're a good guy, but then a couple characters are kind of like, well, what are you doing? Humans are actually evil. And then in the DLC, you have to fight like the embodiment of humanity, who is just like it looks like a huge demon, basically. Which is kind of a strange concept as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I don't know if I've answered the question at all.
Yeah.
I've just kind of dumped a bunch of thoughts out there.
Yeah.
I do like and enjoy the story a lot, and I think it's very inventive.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's my son.
No worries. Let him come on the show. Let him tell us what Dark Souls is about.
Oh, yeah. Do you like Dark Souls? Oh, yeah, you got a cookie. He's happy because he has a cookie. He's showing me. He's like, yeah, take a look at this. He does actually like Dark Souls. When and I probably shouldn't have played it in front of him, but I did a couple times. His favorite part was when I rolled into boxes I smashed the box. He's like, smash.
That's actually oddly satisfying. I've done that several times.
It is. And then you get to the cursed ones or the ones that blow up and you're just like,
yes,
oh, that was stupid.
Yeah, those are always fun. I learned about those the hard way when I was fighting. It was some dude in Dark Souls 2 at the castle. I forget what it's called now. It's like it's a Lost Bastion or something like that. Bastion
Bastille.
Keep. That's it. What is it?
Mm-hmm. The Lost Bastille.
That's it.
Right?
That's it. There was like this dude that was fighting on this walkway, had like a giant spear or something, and I rolled into the barrels like trying to get away from them. They blew up and killed me and him. I'm like, oh, well, those are a thing in this game, I guess. They didn't teach me about that in Zelda. So
yeah. And so things like that too. I feel like in most games they would give you the power to do that, but instead in this game the world does that. Either you can do it if you want to, or you can coax enemies into doing that in order to fight them. It gives you a lot of options like that. It just takes a lot of concepts on its head to where the game doesn't feel like it's about you.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things that I actually kind of found refreshing about the game is that, like, so far in Dark Souls 2, like, I feel like I'm just some random dude that showed up and got pulled into all this crazy stuff. And so I'm just like, it's a different way of telling a story. It's a different way of getting you involved, because normally, like you brought up with Zelda, you're the chosen one, so you're supposed to do this. But with this, it's like you're just some random dude that fell into a swirling vortex of water at some ruins, and now you're trying to figure out, what is all this stuff even going on? Is it a dream? Is it real? What's all this jazz about bonfires and whatnot? So I'm sure there's...
Yeah, and...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the second game actually, I felt like it does kind of prop you up a little bit more, because it talks about how, you have the special like curse where you're going to continue to come back. Not everyone is like that.
Yeah. Like,
not that you're completely unique, but that you are not just like one of the other masses. Whereas in the first game, you're told about this prophecy. And so in the like tutorial area, you're told about this prophecy that if you go ring these bells, then, that good things will happen, basically. And so once you get out of the tutorial area, you talk to someone and they're like, oh, yeah, you're another one trying to ring the bells, right? Good luck with that. And so it tells you like, oh, you're not. Like, it makes it very it makes it known that you are not special.
Yeah.
Like it bashes you over the head with the fact, like, many have tried this and failed, and you're probably not going to make it.
Yeah. And that's, I don't know. I was going to say something about that and I totally just lost it. But I don't know. That's kind of one of the cool things about the game is that, at least for me, I don't get too wrapped up in the story. But if you want to learn about it, you can through those different ways. And I found even just talking to the NPCs, like kind of exhausting all the talking options with them, like help kind of fleshes that world out a little bit and lends to the world building a little bit to where it's still kind of confusing. It's still like, I don't necessarily understand what's going on, but it's never been to a point where it's kind of hindered me. Like, it's never really hindered my enjoyment of the game because, and I could be wrong in this, and dear listeners, you can let me know, is that I think that Dark Souls is more so a story about you than it is a story about the world you're inhabiting, if that makes any sense. I don't know. What do you think about that, Josh?
Well, what do you mean by that? Because I would say, in a certain sense, the opposite, where the world that you're a part of is where the story is actually occurring, and you're just kind of like a person in the middle of that. Now, in like a gameplay context, that's not the case. Like, obviously, it is kind of all about you, and you're doing things, and you're going places. But you're inhabiting kind of a living, breathing, or in this case, dying world. That the story about the world is more interesting than the story that you are on. And you can't understand your story until you know what's going on in the world, which the game doesn't really tell you. You have to be real. You have to have a sharp eye to actually understand those things. Case in point, just saying, I beat the game a couple days ago. I had no idea what the ending meant when I beat it. So although I will say, and I hope this isn't too spoilery, if it is, please forgive me or skip ahead 30 seconds or whatever, but the last boss is not that difficult. Really? I think it's been that way for both games that I've played, and perhaps it's just because I've gotten so much better, like from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. But in both cases, I mean, you're going to die a couple times. I'm not saying you'll beat it in your first try, but it's not like it's not. There are much more difficult bosses throughout the game, so that when you come to the last boss, it's kind of it's another one of those things, like you described it as refreshing. I think in this case it's that as well, because it's almost kind of like a victory lap of like, you have what it takes to beat this boss. Like, you have conquered the rest of the game, and you've gotten better, and you have like surmounted every challenge that has come up against you. So at that point, it becomes more about your journey at the very end of the game, if that makes any sense. So that said, like, the satisfaction of actually beating the game made up for the like nonsensical ending. And I say nonsensical simply because I didn't understand what was happening. Like, again, if you paid really close attention and you understood what the world was doing, then it would make sense, the symbolism behind the ending. But I had no idea. I had no clue.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was kind of going on the more like philosophical route, so to speak, where, you know, but you start the game off and you're not really good at the game, but by the time you get good, you've overcome all these challenges, and in a kind of existential, reflective way, you've learned a lot about yourself too, in terms of like your patience and all that. So that by the time you get to the end of the game, you're almost a different person. Like, you've kind of, I don't know, had these really intense moments where you're about to break the controller or something, or you're fighting this boss and you're like banging your head against the wall, but you've pushed through and you're now able to look back on this long journey and see kind of where you've come from and where you are, so to speak. It's maybe that's taking a little bit of a too deep approach to the game, and maybe that's just my way of trying to justify the time I put into the game, because I still have no idea what's going on.
Dude, I would agree with you 100%. Like that is exactly what I feel like mechanically what the game is saying is that okay, I see what you're saying. It's all about you. It's all about you as a player and getting better. Yes, definitely. Okay. Sorry. I didn't connect with that until just now, but yeah, man, another case in point is that if you talk to anyone about Dark Souls and you played multiple Dark Souls games, because obviously you love Dark Souls after you play your first game because it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
But for the most part, your first entry into the series is going to be the hardest because you don't know. Like that was certainly the case, and I've heard in general 2 is easier than 1. 2 still definitely presents a challenge. I'm not saying anyways. But it definitely was easier to acclimate myself this time around than it was for the first one, simply because I kind of had an idea of how to play, even though it had been like a year. That learning curve was not as steep. I still knew like rolling is super important when a big lumbering giant is like slamming its hammer down on you. Roll out of the way because of your invincibility frames. Important things that had been ingrained in me in the first game were coming back. So it wasn't quite as difficult as the first time around. Also, I knew what kind of character I wanted to play as. This is also another kind of side note, is that the game gives you so many options for different playthroughs. Like you can I mean, I guess it's kind of like Skyrim and other RPGs like that, where you can play. I play as a big, strong tank character who still, like, I want to hit hard and fast is what I want to do. So not quite a rogue, because I feel like they're all about speed, but I still, like, I need to be able to get out of the way, but I hit really hard. For this game, I did not use any spells at all. There are different forms of magic in the game. I didn't use any of them at all. Whereas I dipped my toe in the first game because I wanted to get a feel for, the different play styles. This time, and again, I feel like this is what made it easier, is that I min-maxed. I was like, forget about magic. I'm dumping it all into like agility and attack and strength, so that, like, that was what I focused on. Some bosses that made incredibly difficult, but there are ways around that, which we can talk about, whatever.
Sure.
But that to go along with the point, it is about you learning how to play the games. And even throughout the course of the series, that's true. Because while there are differences in the mechanics from game to game, they all have kind of the same core of how to play. And you get better by persevering.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is a pretty good segue into this because, we here at the Reformed Gamers who like to approach games beyond just the whole, oh, this game's fun, or, oh, look at my KD spread in Call of Duty and all that jazz. I'm sure some people are like, what's a KD spread in Call of Duty? Anyway.
Do you eat that with crackers?
I know. Do you do it with cheese or do you do it with crackers? What about chips? We like to play these games from a biblical perspective, and we're kind of starting to get into that territory where we're looking deep into the game. And as we mentioned earlier, the game is pretty dark. It is grim.
Yes.
So what can we as Christians, or I guess, how can we approach this game in a way that redeems the time that we spend playing the game? Or I guess, what are some themes that we as Christians can look at in this game series?
Okay, well, the one that came to mind when I first played through the original Dark Souls, and I hope this isn't too cheesy, but it seriously resonated with me throughout the game, is obviously a big theme is perseverance, of fighting against these enemies and not giving up. And that immediately taught me about, like, how to fight sin in your life.
Oh, interesting.
That's where my brain went, is like, in this game, there are, hordes of enemies that you come up against, and the first time you fight him, it seems impossible to beat. You're just like, you go into a room and then there's like 6 enemies that come at you and you're like, how am I supposed to do this? If it was just one at a time, it'd be okay. But 6 of them surrounding me, this is stupid. And I don't get how you do this. And then you keep fighting and you keep trying and you try different strategies and different weapons and different things to combat this obstacle until you finally are able to beat it. And thinking about that in the context of sin in the life of a Christian, that's what we need to be doing. There's a book, I'm sure I think you or Adam have mentioned it before, but John Owen, The Mortification of Sin. That's what it's called.
Yeah, we quote that often on the show.
Yeah, man. I've got a tattoo that was inspired by that.
There you go.
But there's a quote. It's real simple. He says, "Be killing sin, or it will be killing you."
Yep.
So it's this idea of being on the offensive, and that's not a casual thing, right? It's not like, again, you don't play Dark Souls to like wind down. You don't usually have a glass of wine and have like classical music playing while you're playing Dark Souls. This is not how it's done.
You don't do that? I do that all the time.
In the bubble bath. No, I'm just kidding.
Bubble bath.
That's generally not how you play. I don't know. With me, I'm usually standing because I'm like, I'm physically moving while I play this game.
Yeah.
Because I'm so just like, and my palms are sweaty. And no, I'm just kidding. So, gosh, references. This is stupid. Fighting sin and learning strategies in your own life in order to fight sin, because sometimes sin seems insurmountable, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are besetting sins in the life of a Christian that seem so difficult to fight against that, I've failed so many times in this area. Is it even worth trying to continue to fight? And frankly, without Christ, you're not going to win. You need to be resting in Christ in order to fight sin. Yeah. At the same time, you need to fight. You need to actually battle. You need to strategize ways to fight against that sin. You can't just casually be. You have to always be considering the ways in which sin will entice you, right? And your sin is different than my sin. Areas where you may be strong at, I may be weak in. Things that set me off, that tempt me to sin, may not tempt other people to sin. And so there's that aspect also, even just not getting into that. But the whole idea of knowing yourself and knowing how sin like often attacks you and knowing how to combat that is important in the life of a Christian. This game, the personification of these huge battles and these insurmountable obstacles, it was a very good representation in my mind of how you ought to be fighting sin, and you ought to give no quarter to sin. You ought not to, you don't play with fire, right? You don't get close and see how close to sin can you get without actually sinning. No, as soon as you sense that temptation, you flee, and you run away, and Satan will flee, right? I'm probably messing up that quote. But learning your enemy and learning what you're fighting and how that sin attacks you. Recently, actually, in my life, one thing that really stuck out to me, I was reading scripture, and it's Jesus' command to in your fight against sin to words are hard.
Yep.
But where he says to if you're fighting, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. And, without spending the next 20 minutes on what that actually means, I think the point of what he's saying is that we ought to fight with everything. against sin, because sin is so much more evil. It's so much more wicked than we give it credit for, right?
Yeah.
Often we can just say, like, it's human, right? And everyone's going to sin, just shrug it off.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's an affront against God, and you ought to be fighting against it with everything that you have. So a phrase that I continually have to remind myself when I'm tempted to sin in certain areas in my life is cut off your hands. Cut off your hands. Like whatever it is that is leading you down that road and tempting you, don't take it. Skip that road. Take the back roads.
Yeah.
So that you're not even going down that way. Okay, so I feel like I'm on this diatribe now, so forgive me. But like honestly, this is how a video game, right, is teaching me about these truths of Scripture. And I think that's intentional. I think that's the way that God has made it, that all of our experiences in life, because God has created all things, that they point to him.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get away from that. And that's what I see in this video. That's the main thing that speaks to me when I play it, is just like, man, just like I am relentless in this video game, I ought to be against sin in my own life.
Yeah. Well, that even kind of goes back to that Spurgeon quote from earlier, is like paying attention to the things around you and learning from them. And
yeah,
I mean, Dark Souls is very much like that. I mean, Celeste is like that. Mega Man's like that. You got to pay attention to that stuff. And I think even we're getting on this point here is just kind of knowing yourself and your own weaknesses. And in so doing, kind of how to fight better. I mean, if you're a person, for example, who struggles with pornography, for example, you're probably not going to play games like GTA, Witcher 3, Catherine, and several other games, because that that's going to allow that temptation to exploit your own weakness and cripple you, and possibly even kill you. Maybe not physically, but certainly spiritually and emotionally. And Dark Souls is the same way. When you're playing, you kind of have to know your character a decent amount, and you kind of have to know your surroundings. You have to know how much stamina you have, how your moves work, how the enemy works, and kind of the shortcomings of some of your attacks. And in so doing, you get better at fighting because you know your weaknesses, you know your flaws, and you know how to move forward based off of that. And that's kind of one of the things about a Christian, really, is that the best ways that you can defend yourself against sin is, one, knowing yourself and your weaknesses, but also knowing how temptation and how Satan's going to try and tear you down. I mean, once you know your opponent's attacks, you can dodge or defend them much better. And it all lends itself to this idea of what you're talking about, Josh, with this relentless battle against sin, and how you don't give up even when you mess up, And that's one of the cool things about Dark Souls, is that how it teaches you to not be afraid of failure, but rather learn from it. I mean, there's just a lot of ways you can apply that in life, especially as a Christian, is that if you're a person that's been fighting sin, you're in prayer, you're vigilant with prayer, and you're vigilant about putting on the armor of God and being or living in community with your local church and all that. There's still going to be times where you fail, but it's in those moments where you kind of look back and go, okay, so here's how I messed up. Here's what I won't do again. Here's how I can better go about that next time. And it's just one of those things where, and again, I get that this is really deep into Dark Souls, and probably the developers didn't intend for this, or who knows, maybe they did.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole game is just one giant philosophical thing. But it's that idea of perseverance, right?
Yeah.
That you're getting at, that I think is so key, that I think really Dark Souls does a good job of teaching you, which you wouldn't think that a video game could teach you something about life or even the Bible, but yeah, here we are, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to add anything else to that. I'm trying to think of some other themes as well, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just like we kind of touched on it before, like the whole idea of man being evil is definitely, I would say, a Christian theme. You know, most people, at least in our current cultural context, would not agree with that statement that man is evil. Obviously, we don't believe that man was created evil, but that he's fallen of his own accord. Mm-hmm. You know, we mess up, and so it is our bent to do evil. So that's an interesting concept that pops up in this game of like how that twists power. So like especially in the Dark Souls games themselves. I don't think it's the case in Bloodborne. I think that's a different context, but it's very like medieval feeling. Mm-hmm. And so you get like these monarchies, and you get kings and queens and royalty and things like that, and how your ascent to power throughout the game, because you're a human, also it's bittersweet, because although your intentions may be pure, there's also this sense of looming kind of failure, or at least that if you get what you want, then the world is going to be worse off, if that makes sense. Like the power that you wield, even though you are good, humanity in general is not. Like even though you have good intentions, mm-hmm. humanity in general is not, and they're going to take that power and twist it, and the world is still going to be a horrible place. Mm-hmm. Basically, you cannot be the savior of the world. Oof. Even though that's what your intention is, like, you know, you feel like a good guy in this game, taking down all the bad, you know, some are just straight up demons. Some of the bosses that you fight, a lot of them are like other characters throughout the story that have turned evil. You know, they've turned hollow. And so you feel like a good guy, like killing these bad guys, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you may the story is vague enough to say, like, to kind of imply you're going to end up like that. Oof. You know, that you're you're not going to save the day. Yeah. Like you're doing good, and you will like prolong some good in the world, but ultimately you can't. And that's why the game is pretty grim. It is dark, Dark Souls. But I don't know. Again, you use the word refreshing, and I like that a lot. It's different than a lot of other games that teach you that you. And it's funny too, because you know these two different concepts. Like, yes, perseverance, like you are, but on the other hand, it's like ultimately you can't. Ultimately, the endings are bittersweet because of their implications. There is no happily ever after. Yeah. There's New Game Plus.
There's New Game Plus.
So you go through it all over again.
Which will hopefully bring you some hope, but it'll probably just crush your dreams even more.
It's harder, definitely.
It kind of got me thinking as you were talking about just this idea that man is evil or depraved on this never-ending journey of constantly being corrupted. When you first started playing Dark Souls 2 and they were talking about the curse that your character has of being a hollow, did you think, and this could just be just me, did you think in some way that that's reflective of kind of the curse of man from the Garden of Eden?
I hadn't put that together, but I like that. Let's see, where are you going with that? So the game,
I was just thinking of how like, and I haven't really fleshed this idea out at all. So maybe someone else, a dear listener, can help me with this. But just how at the beginning of the game, you're kind of cursed, and when you die and come back, you kind of you reveal kind of your dead-like nature, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of constantly under this curse, but you can use these little items that restore your humanity, so to speak. But you still know that at the end of the day that character is still cursed. Like there's still not, that hasn't been lifted yet. They haven't really been redeemed just yet. And so that's about as far as I've gotten with that thought. Because again, I haven't finished the game yet. I just got to the shaded forest. So I'm not really sure how that would work itself out, or even if it does. Or maybe I'm just grasping for straws. I don't know. So
no, I like it. I like it. I think that's really cool. Like even just the fact that you are undead and how that plays into the game and how we see humanity in general. No, I think that's really cool.
Well, cool. I am validated then. But that's about the only other thing that I can think of. Because again, I mean, I'm sure I'll have more thoughts after I finish the game and move on to Dark Souls 3 and all that. But yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna jump straight into 3 after 2, because I feel like that would be kind of like a Monster Hunter syndrome where I'm playing so much of one game I get burnt out, and I don't want that to happen.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I took a break after I beat it. There's still a bunch of DLC content that I haven't gotten into.
Oh, really?
I did try it throughout the game. So have you, I mean, I guess this kind of gets into sort of spoilery stuff. I don't know. Whatever, however you want to say it.
Yeah, it's been like 7 years since these games have come out.
There you go. So play them. Dang it. No, but the way that the DLC is integrated into this game is very natural. Like you wouldn't really notice it as DLC.
Oh, really?
If you don't know. So have you kindled any of the primal bonfires?
Yeah, I got one of those after
I think you've done the first one.
What was it? Who did I fight? The Lost Sinner.
Oh, the Lost Sinner. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Crazy boss fight.
So many good moments in this game. Yeah. Man. So sorry. So after you kindle the primal bonfires, there's like a statue of like these snakes. Did you see that? And there's like a blue flame in the middle of it.
No.
It's in the room. So you kindle that bonfire, and then like just past that is one of those little shrines. And if you like sit at the primal bonfire, it takes you back to the hub to Majula. And so if you did that, like it'll automatically do that, and you can't go back to that primal bonfire. You can go to one of the other ones and then just go past it if you want to. But I did that for the first one, so I didn't even realize what that shrine was until like the second or third one. But what those do is that they warp you to another world, like another area. And those are the DLC areas. So I went to one of them. I want to say it was the third one, and it was pretty dang tough. But I got to a point where it was like a gauntlet of tough melee enemies plus like an archer. Plus a magician who would cast like a slow on you so that you were super slow. And I'm just, and there's like 3 different rooms of that before you fight a tough boss. So I'm just like, I'm done. I'm not supposed to be here. This is DLC. I'm going back home and continuing the story. Yeah. So that's as far as I've gotten into the DLC. And I just decided for the first time, because I'm generally pretty competitive, and I'm like, no, I'm going to beat this. I got to the point where I just ran past everyone, and then I got to the boss room, and I'm just like, what is this? This is stupid. There's no way. Like, how? So
yeah,
I got out. So there's DLC stuff.
I haven't done that. Maybe I'll go and try to figure that out later tonight. I don't know. That sounds like something I don't want to try just yet.
I assume the other DLCs are not as tough as that, but
you hope so, right?
Right. You can't do this to me twice. Yeah, so I may go back into that. I'm probably going to tackle some other games before I do, just to finish off my draft list, but probably actually finish up Zelda first.
There you go.
But then I might go back before doing Dark Souls 3. So you own Dark Souls 3?
Yeah, I got that like the gold edition or something when it was on sale during the holidays. I was like, I'm going to play this eventually. I might as well go ahead and pick it up while it's super cheap because I think I got it for $25 with all the DLC. So,
nice.
Like,
that's cool. Well. Yeah, that's the thing about the Humble Bundle is it only includes one of the DLCs. I think there are multiple, so it only has one.
Yeah,
so
there's at least two.
Part of like the completionist part of me is like, but I want it,
right?
But then the part of me that's like, dude, $12.
Yeah, it's like, come on, so you could buy so much of Taco Bell with that $12.
Oh no! Don't tell me that. You could buy 12 orders of their fries.
You actually could. So, just saying.
Or you could play like minimum 40-hour RPG that you will love, even while it's beating you down. So I think I'm gonna have to go with that. I don't know. It's a tough one. Listeners, what do you think? We're going to start a poll no, I'm just kidding.
We'll start a poll and then we'll start another poll that stems from that first poll and then we'll just keep it going. What's
better, Dark Souls 3 or 12 orders of Taco Bell fries? I'm actually curious what people...
I'm going to post that poll before we archive the group on Sunday just to annoy people and see how that goes over. But
can you vote in a poll while it's archived?
We'll find out.
Or do people just have to stare? Oh yeah,
we'll find out. I'm going to do it. And the only people that know that this is going to happen are the dear patrons. Everybody else is going to be like, what's going on?
Getting your money's worth, man.
There you go. So before we kind of start wrapping things up, we always do a thing when we talk in depth about these kind of games where we ask the question, is this a game that we would reco? And of course, this is a series of games. So Josh, is this a series of games that you would reco the dear listeners to at least try?
Absolutely. I would say it is definitely a commitment. Like I said, it's at least 40 hours. And you know, part of that, probably like 15 of those hours, it's going to feel like you're not making progress. So you do have to like prepare for it. Don't think this is going to be casual. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the mood for something casual, then I mean, stay away.
Yeah.
But it is extremely satisfying, and I understand if you're not a fan of scary games, because the games it's very intimidating when you don't know what's in front of you, and so it can be scary just straight up. Even though it's not an actual horror game, like that's not the point. It does have certain elements because you're afraid of who's gonna kill, because some enemies can kill you in like 2 hits, and so you're freaking out. Especially they do a thing in this game where there's almost no music in the game except when you're at boss battles. Yeah. And then it's like choirs playing, and so you just feel the weight of how powerful this boss is. Anyways, so there are just a few caveats. If you want a casual game, this is not a casual game. If you get spooked easily, then you know you can dip your toe into this one. But the problem with that is I feel like you have to put in a good 10 hours or so to really make up your mind, because the first few hours is acclimating to the game itself. So you have to give it a good college try, you know? Otherwise you're not really feeling what the game is really all about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I would highly recommend, and also, so the last tiny little caveat would be, if you're the type of person that does like grim or dark things can affect you, like if you have a tendency to have like a morose kind of personality, and this is an area of temptation for you, then I completely understand why you would not want to play this type of game, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I have other series that I enjoy that I understand other people. I've mentioned it in the group a couple times. I really like this Shin Megami Tensei series of games, but they can be pretty dark, and I understand they're not for everyone. And so that's the only thing that I would say about this as well, is if that is an issue for you, if even, you have you do struggle with anger and you think that frustration is going to carry over. If you get frustrated while playing a video game, that's going to carry over into your family life or the time that you have in community with other people, then know yourself, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I'm rambling again. Those are my only caveats. Outside of that, absolutely highly recommended. I've said it before. This playing through the second game has solidified this series as one of my favorite series of all time. It's just it's designed so well. I dig it.
Yeah, man.
How about you? What did you say?
I would actually agree with all of your points. I didn't even think about the whole aspect of, if kind of like dark themed games or something mess with you or bother you, pass on it. It's a good caveat. But I would just recommend, it's just one of those games where you just kind of have to know what you're getting into. It's not going to be like Call of Duty. It's a game that you're going to have to take slow and get used to a lot of the mechanics, because it's I think for a lot of people it's going to be very different than what you're used to playing. But if you take the time to get used to it, kind of work your way up into the game, slowly go through it, I think there's a lot to be enjoyed, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had. Now, that being said, it's not a game for everybody. So even though I do reco this game, probably the best thing to do is to not go out and buy the game, but actually go to Redbox and rent it, which is what I reco for any game that you're curious about, is just hit up Redbox, rent it, or if you got a friend that has a copy, borrow it from them, see what you think, and go from there. So,
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna be a turd and throw out another caveat.
Okay,
it is rated M, and there are reasons. It can get
really?
a little gory. I'm pretty sure, right? Did I just lie on camera?
I mean, on camera. I'm at a point where, like, I'm so old now, I just don't pay attention to those for the most part, unless it's for good reasons, like GTA and all that jazz has.
Yeah, no, it's not. I don't think there's any. I can't remember any like sexuality in the game. It's just for like horror theme and some gruesome violence. There's just some scary images. So that said, I would not. If you are a young teenager, I would not immediately recommend this game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Dark Souls 2 is rated T for teen, but.
It is. Wow.
Still.
Okay. My bad, guys. I lied.
No, I'll even add this, because I know some of our listeners are teenagers. Talk with your parents about this one, because this is not something like, this is just me being a youth pastor right now, but you don't want to be playing a game that your parents are going to have objections to for very good reasons. I understand that some parents are a little overbearing in that department of entertainment, but at the same time, if you're living with your parents, you're under their authority. Just respect that. If they don't want you to play Dark Souls, don't play Dark Souls. Simple as that.
Exactly. Yeah,
that goes
got
for
it.
Everything. But anyway,
okay. So I just did a quick Google search. The first Dark Souls is rated M. The second one is rated teen.
Huh.
That is so weird.
That's really weird.
That is so weird. Unless Google's lying to me, which may be the case.
Probably be a discussion around how, like, things that were like violent or something, like several years ago we'd find like really bad, but now we're become so desensitized to it that it's now like nothing. I think there's an episode in there somewhere that talks about that we could come up with. Anyway. Oh man, Josh Broccolo, thank you for joining us on episode 111 of the Reformed Gamers, dude. It's always good to have you on. I always like having you on. I always like hearing from you and talking to you. You're a cool dude.
Well, thank you. I enjoy this a lot. I don't have too many outlets for my nerdiness, although I do think about video games a lot. On my podcast, I hardly ever talk about video games because my wife just is not as into them as I am. Mm-hmm. So no, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for allowing me to ramble because I know that I have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, that's what we do on the show. Oh, dude, Dark Souls 3 is rated M for mature.
There we go.
Huh.
There we go.
Sorry,
So
I'm just on ESRB's website now, just looking at all this stuff.
Yep. That's what I did for the first one, and it showed that it showed that it was mature. And now, and again, Google is my friend. There are multiple articles from back when Dark Souls 2 was initially like announced that are like, don't worry, it's rated teen, but it's not, but it doesn't change that much. Like, don't worry about the ESRB rating. Like, there are actual articles noting how it went from mature to teen, which is kind of funny. But that's video game journalism industry news cycle.
Yep.
Thing.
Yep. That's why we're here, to try to be, I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyway, so dear listeners, thank you for checking out this episode of the Reform Gamers. If you like what you heard, head over to iTunes, leave us a rating and review, or head over to patreon.com/thereformgamers and consider supporting the show. But before we let you go, some recos. Josh, what should our dear listeners check out that you would recommend?
Okay. So we got two quick things. Hopefully I'm going to make this quick. The first one is, like I had mentioned, sorry, I'm not very good at that. The first one's what I mentioned earlier is VaatiVidya on YouTube. If you want to learn about the SoulsBourne series and the lore behind them, his videos are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
There is some language. He is not like gratuitous in his use of language. It is only occasional, but it is there. Like, I've been watching him. Sometimes my wife kind of like looks over at me and like, our kids are present. And I'm like, dang it, I forgot that he does that occasionally. I couldn't tell. He's British. It doesn't sound bad. But anyways, he's got some really good stuff if you're interested in the lore behind these games. The other thing is a very niche piece of comedic material. It is a movie, just because we had talked about this on our podcast. It is a movie that my wife and I both absolutely love, and feel like no one on earth has ever seen this except us. But it's hilarious and it's awkward, and you probably won't enjoy it the first time you watch it, but it's so good. How is that for a glowing recommendation? I
mean, it sounds pretty good to me.
The creators of Napoleon Dynamite, which I feel like you take it or leave it. I was not a huge proponent of that movie. Mm-hmm. The first movie was Napoleon Dynamite. Their second movie is Nacho Libre, which is one of my favorite comedies.
So good.
Ever. So good. Their third movie is a movie called Gentlemen Broncos, which the title doesn't make any sense. I don't even know what it has to do with the movie. Anyways, it's a movie about this homeschooled kid who writes science fiction novels and goes off to a writing camp and meets people. And one of the speakers at this writing camp is played by Jermaine Clement, who is half of the Flight of the Conchords.
Oh, okay.
And he is absolutely hilarious. He is also a science fiction writer. He ends up taking his story, the kid's story, and it goes all kinds of wacky places from there. But the plot is not the point, because this movie is so awkward and just hilarious. Being a homeschooled kid myself, I just find it absolutely hilarious because of the way that characters act in this movie. And just some of the things that happen. Like, it plays, there are little glimpses into his stories that he writes that they play out in parts of the movie. And Sam Rockwell, if you know who he is,
sounds familiar.
Gosh, he's been in. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like main roles that he played in. If you've seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he was. Yeah. What's his name? Zaphod Beeblebrox, the guy who like turned his head around. Anyways, Sam Rockwell, I think he's a fantastic actor. He plays like the main character in the kids' stories, and he is absolutely fantastic because he has this dumb like Southern accent. And then when the story changes, he's very effeminate, and that is hilarious as well. Anyways, Very strange, awkward movie. One of my favorites, Gentlemen Broncos. I highly recommend it. Hopefully you will enjoy it.
Right on.
But I can't guarantee it.
Well, I've got it queued up on iTunes, so we'll see how it goes.
Heyo.
So for my recos then is go check out the So Talk to Me podcast. I hear that the host of it, his name's Josh. He's a pretty cool dude. I mean, I don't know. I don't know him personally or anything. But no, go check out their stuff. Love the show. It's funny. It's losing my train of thought. Words. There it is. It's edifying. It's just fantastic stuff. Go check them out.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome, dude. Also, subscribe to The Reformed Gamers on YouTube at youtube.com/The Reformed Gamers. We've got 2 series going on right now. We're going through Horizon the Frozen Wilds and Fury. And plus, we put all of our episodes on there as well. So if you like YouTube, if you're on there often throughout the week, it's a great way to get caught up on the show. It's a great way to check out some of the games that we're playing and things of that nature. So again, youtube.com/The Reformed Gamers. And also check out the book by Charles Spurgeon, The Power of Prayer. If you ever wondered what prayer is all about, if you've ever been curious about how you could be more efficient or effective with prayer, check out the book. It's biblically sound. It's not hokey. It's not crazy. It's biblically sound. It's fantastic stuff, and you will enjoy it. But that being said, dear listeners, again, patreon.com/The Reformed Gamers. If you like the show and you want to consider supporting us and helping us grow a little bit, you can do so there. Subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/The Reformed Gamers. Head over to our website, thereformedgamers.wordpress.com, where we will actually be posting, along with our show notes, 2 articles every month, thanks to the dear patrons helping us reach our goal of that. Now, we just put a new article up earlier today talking about games that discuss psychological themes and things of that nature. Fantastic stuff. I wrote it myself, so I'm not gonna brag on myself, but I'm kind of proud of it. So that's gonna be on the website. Head over there, give us a follow, and you can always follow us on Twitter at TRG Podcast. With that being said, Josh, how can our dear listeners get in touch with y'all on your podcast?
Yeah. So I guess the podcast, you can see me. I'm in the group. If you're on Facebook, you can see me there. But for the podcast, we are on Twitter. Our handle is _talk-to-me, or you can email us at sotalktomepodcast@gmail.com.
Cool stuff, man. I'll post links to all that in the show notes as well, dear listeners. But that being said, episode 111 is coming to a close. And Josh, again, man, thank you for coming in and helping us record this episode. Coming in the clutch, coming in like a dear listener supreme, like a boss. Always appreciate it.
Happy to be here, man. Thanks, especially talking about something as cool as Dark Souls.
True.
It's good stuff.
True. And dear listeners, if you have played Dark Souls and you want to have that discussion with us, hit us up on Patreon if you're a dear patron, or in the Facebook group or Twitter. But until next time, GG and amen.